Hey guys, before I get started on this episode, had someone in the YouTube comment section last week suggest that I should start doing live streams after games. So I'm going to heed that advice directly after Wednesday's season opener against the Portland Trail Blazers. I'll jump into a YouTube live stream probably at around 10 p.m. Pacific time. I would imagine you guys can jump in as well, share your comments. I'll read them live on the live stream. We'll probably go for around half an hour, depending on how much you guys are involved, obviously, and also what topics are to discuss after Wednesday's game. If you can't make it, I'll upload it as a podcast episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. shortly afterwards, and of course, you'll be able to rewatch it on YouTube as well. Looking forward to that one. Hope you guys can make it, and otherwise, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast, as the October 21 contract extension deadline has just passed minutes ago, with no extension for Jonathan Kuminga, but as first reported on Sunday, a 3-year, $39 million extension for Moses Moody. So mixed news on the fourth-year lottery picks. Let's jump straight into it. We'll start with Kuminga first, because we've known now for the last couple of hours that there was going to be no deal forthcoming, no agreement between Kuminga's camp and the Warriors, which was understandable and expected based on the reporting we'd heard over recent weeks and recent months. I have been very disappointed, I think, with the reaction to this on social media among Warrior fans, and a bit perplexed by it as well. There has been general negativity around this, and some people saying, well, it shows that he's never been a good fit, that the Warriors don't necessarily believe in him, that they, I've heard even people say, oh, well, they shouldn't have drafted him in the first place. Like, come on now. Like, to go back to that initial selection in 2021 based on today's decision, I think is just silly. I find it really difficult to evaluate and judge this situation without actually knowing fully what Kuminga was asking for. Now, we can presume that he was asking for the max based on what Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports said back in early August, like a while ago now. But we have no idea, absolutely no idea what the Warriors' potential offer for Kuminga was in terms of a contract extension. And without knowing that, I find it really difficult to be too judgmental of either side, to be honest. And as I've said previously on this podcast, this was always going to be the way. It is a realistic and understandable situation from both sides, that for Kuminga, he would want to view himself as a guy in the same realm as Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Franz Wagner, Scotty Barnes, the guys that got the full 5-year max, $224 million. And for the Warriors, as outlined in ESPN's article by Kendra Andrews and Shams Charania, they want to see more growth. Not only that, but they also want to see the relationship between Kuminga and Steve Kerr, which we know going back to January was pretty testy, where Kuminga kind of went to the media and Shams then of The Athletic had that report that JK had lost faith in Steve Kerr, and it really resulted as a positive because it kind of turned around. I'm not sure it turned around the relationship, but all of a sudden Steve was much more comfortable and much more trusting in playing JK over the remainder of the season, where from January 1 onwards, I think that incident, I suppose, or the media report came after a January 5 game against the Nuggets, I think, where we were all perplexed by the fact that Kuminga didn't play at all in like the last 16 or 18 minutes of the game after playing well for the first 2.5 quarters. It was truly bizarre. But from January 1 onwards, JK averages 18.6 points, over 54% shooting from the floor, has a real breakout to end his third season, has that minor knee injury, which put a bit of a dent in it towards the end and saw him come off the bench over the last couple of games, including the final playing game against the Sacramento Kings. So as much as that was a great leap and great growth for JK, we want to see a full year of it. We want to see more of it, and for him to take another leap in his fourth season. And I completely understand the Warriors wanting to see that growth and ultimately where he fits in Steve Kerr's plans as well, because if we're going into this season and we're still a little bit unsure about what his role is, then of course the front office is not going to give the guy a $150+ million contract. That is understandable. And from JK's perspective, I understand him wanting to feel like he's in a similar realm to those other guys I mentioned who got the max extension. So this is just the reality of the situation to me. And I don't think anyone's to blame. And I don't really understand the negative feedback and reaction that's come across Warriors social media. I don't get it at all because it's, as I've said, it's impossible to judge who might be to blame here. I don't think there's anyone to blame right now. And if there was someone to be blamed on either side, then we could only know that by understanding what the Warriors were potentially offering, what Kuminga turned down, and whatever else. Because if the Warriors were only offering 100 million, then you could blame the Warriors for not going high enough, because I think they should have gone higher than that. If they offered 150, 160 million and Kuminga turned that down, then I would not blame Kuminga, but I'd be like, well, I'd be a bit disappointed. Let's put it that way. I'd be disappointed because that's a lot of money to give up, and I think that's about what his worth is. And he's seeing himself as more than that, which again is fine, it's his prerogative, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with it by any means. Like, I think ultimately, I'm looking at these other deals that have been signed today. Jalen Suggs getting 5 years, $150.5 million. Jalen Johnson in the last few minutes here has, at the final second, agreed to a 5-year, $150 extension with the Atlanta Hawks. Even Trey Murphy III getting 4 years, $112 from the New Orleans Pelicans. I think Kuminga is around that range, right, where it's around $30 million a season. That's what I would have been offering. Those same deals that Suggs and Jalen Johnson got, I would have been offering that to Kuminga. Now, we don't know if the Warriors did or not. And again, it's impossible to judge without knowing that. So I don't particularly understand the feedback. This idea that, oh, well, clearly the Warriors don't believe in him. No, there's got to be a middle ground. It can't be he either gets the max or the Warriors don't believe in him. Like, there's plenty of room here for, JK. Again, we don't know the situation. JK's camp might have gone to the Warriors and said, we want the max, nothing less. And the Warriors understandably turned around and said, no, like, we can't do that right now. Like, you have a good fourth year, we'll come back to it in restricted free agency, but we can't do that right now. Doesn't mean that they don't believe in him and they don't see him as part of long-term plans. It just means like they want to see more before they give him a max extension, right? And then other people saying that, he's not going to get $30 million a year in free agency. I'm very much of the belief that he's going to get at least $30 million a year in free agency from either the Warriors or elsewhere. Like, I think he's that talented. I know there's a lack of teams with cap room. I understand that, but there's plenty of stuff to go on in terms of trades and whatever throughout before the mid-season deadline, so teams could potentially open up salary cap room. Who knows what can happen between now and then? I just think some team will take a chance, and then it could be up to the Warriors to match that or not. And that's the whole thing with the Warriors as well, is like, this is restricted free agency. This isn't free agency. This is restricted free agency. It's here for a reason. It gives the team a backup, some support if an extension like this doesn't get done, as it has. So, like, the Warriors have got some backup here. They've still got the ball in their court a little bit in terms of being able to enter a restricted free agency. And if JK gets a deal, gets an offer sheet from another team, and the Warriors are happy to match it, then Jonathan Kuminga stays as a Warrior. Now, is it an ideal situation? No, I'm not saying it's an ideal situation. I would have liked an extension to be done, but I think there has been a lot of overreaction among the fan base and what I've seen on social media in terms of the negativity, in terms of saying that they don't want JK around, potential trade speculation, they don't believe in him, they shouldn't have drafted him in the first place, which I just think is silly. So, I mean, a lot of these things, I just think it's a massive overreaction, and now it's just a case of, okay, let the guy play out the season, see what he does. Now, is there going to be huge trade speculation throughout the season? Probably. There probably will be, because no extension means he is still going to be trade eligible this season, as opposed to a guy like Moses Moody, who is still trade eligible, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to match salaries. I'll talk about that in a second. So there is going to be some significant trade speculation, I think, particularly if it becomes even more glaringly obvious that the Warriors need a second star. Kuminga is going to be a piece in that. Now, where his value lies from a trade standpoint is going to be interesting now, because I think any team that trades for him would have to understand that, okay, if we give anything of value up for this guy, we're going to have to pay him the 30 plus million I'm talking about in free agency. Now, I think that would hamper his trade value a little bit for the Warriors, and what they could expect to get in return is probably going to be less than what we would ideally like. And I think that was the case in the offseason as well, when they were looking at marketing, and the reports that the Jazz were more interested in Podziemski, and not because Pods is necessarily, looks to be a better player down the track, but more so because he's under a rookie contract for 3 more years, as opposed to, again, Kuminga going to have a massive jump on his 5th year salary compared to his 4th. So I'm just disappointed. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed with the outcome, but I understand the outcome, and I'm more disappointed at the reaction to it, the overreaction to it. I just don't think it's necessarily. I don't think it's necessary, and I also think it's just understandable. It's just the reality of this situation. Both sides had differing motives, and they couldn't come together on anything, which again is disappointing. But I think there's no one to blame in this. There's no fault in this, particularly when we don't know what the actual numbers on the table were. So that's really, really what it is. And it's going to be interesting to see like the Kerr Kuminga dynamic as the season progresses and how he uses JK. Of course, we think he's going to be probably the starting small forward on opening night against the Trailblazers. That's yet to be confirmed based on what we saw in preseason. That will probably be the case. Now, will he prove good enough to be the starting small forward going forward, and that's going to be a long-term thing, or will it be a case of Steve having to change the team slightly, whether it's JK himself moving back to the bench or the Warriors going small, Draymond at the 5, Kuminga to the 4, bring in Melton or something like that to start? We'll wait and see. We'll know in the fullness of time come the start of the season against the Trailblazers on Wednesday. Moses Moody, a bit more positive stuff here. 3 years, $39 million contract extension announced yesterday. I love it. I absolutely love it for the Warriors. I think this should result as a really team-friendly contract. $13 million a year. Now, it's probably a bit of an overpay based on the production we've seen so far, but based on the production we saw in preseason, it's probably going to be an underpay. And I think most of us think that Moses will eventually get there in terms of being a consistent rotation player. And if he can be the 20, 25 minute per game productive two-way wing in this league, then $13 million a year is really cheap, in my opinion. And I think that's a great deal for the Warriors. And it's a good deal for Moses. There's no doubt about that. Could he have risked it and tried to get more in free agency? Yeah, he probably could have. And I would have also understood if he did that, if there was no extension forthcoming for him and he wanted to play out this season and try and up his value to, Slater mentioned last week in his article, potentially trying to double his value to getting over $20 million a year in free agency. I think that might have been a bit more unlikely than Kuminga getting 30, just again, like the lack of cap room teams have. I'm not sure if anyone would have been offering Moses over 20, but who knows? We don't know because we're waiting to see what this fourth year brings for Moses. And if he takes the leap, takes a jump, gets the consistent role that we all believe he can, then I think this contract is going to age very nicely for the Warriors. One little tidbit on this, though, that I think was a little bit of a mistake maybe from the Warriors. Brett Siegel of Clutch Points reported after the extension announcement yesterday that Moody's camp were actually looking for a fourth year on top of the 3-year extension. Now, I would have done that if I were the Warriors. I really would have done that. Now, obviously with the CBA going up, it probably would have been like 4 years, 55 in the end, maybe like $15, $16 million on that fourth year. I would have done that. I don't see the risk, like any greater risk in adding a fourth year at $15 million than what you've taken already in the 3-year 39, which I don't think is much of a risk at all, mind you. I don't see the difference in that. Now, yes, you could say, it's going to give them more cap flexibility in the summer of 2028 because this is Moses's contract will end 2027-28 season. If he lasts, if he plays the whole contract at the Warriors, which we hope he does, then yes, okay, they'll have extra flexibility in the 2028 off season, which is far down the track. But I also think like you've got to think about it as it could also lessen their flexibility because if he does become the player many envisage, and given just the general rise in the salary cap, you could easily see him, getting upwards of 20, maybe even upwards of $25 million on his next contract by 2028. And again, that means you're going to have to pay that money earlier than if you gave him a 4-year deal at around $50-55 million. And I compared it in an article for Blue Man Hoop. I compared it to giving Steph Curry the 4-year, $44 million extension, was it in 2012, which no one's comparing Moses Moody to Steph Curry. No one's expecting Moses Moody to come out and all of a sudden be an MVP caliber player. No one's arguing that. I'm not arguing that. However, if you think about that Curry extension, like what if the Warriors had only given Steph 3 years instead of 4 at that period of time? Now, they would have had to give him the max a year earlier, and that most likely means no Kevin Durant in 2016, which could then I don't know if you want to say whether the Warriors would have won the championships or not in 2017, 2018 without KD. I mean, that Steph extension is a complete franchise-altering contract. Completely franchise-altering contract. Unbelievable. Now, again, no one's arguing that this is going to be the level of steal that the Warriors got with Steph in regards to this one with Moses. No one's arguing that he's going to become an MVP. I don't think he's going to become anywhere close to an all-star. I mean, fingers crossed, maybe there is a giant leap there that means he can. I don't think so. But what I do know is that I think this contract will age pretty well, and that therefore I would have been willing to do the 4th year, because that means you could have that team-friendly contract for a year longer rather than necessarily having to perhaps double his contract when it now expires at the end of the 2027-28 season. So I think that's maybe, if that report is true and the Moody camp wanted the extra year, that might be the one mistake the Warriors made. Now, it could go the other way. Maybe Moses never gets a consistent role, and maybe, they actually have to get off his contract because they're just overpaying for a guy who can't bed down a consistent role. Maybe that's the case, and therefore not giving the 4th year is the right decision. But I actually think at this point, given what we've seen in preseason, I'm optimistic and confident that it's going to be the other way, that this is going to result as a really team-friendly contract, and the Warriors have done pretty well, but they perhaps could have done even better had they given him the 4th year. The other couple of things on this, so the trade standpoint of it, this is maybe the first time in a couple of years where Moses, aside from after the trade deadline where you can't be traded for that period from after the trade or after the trade deadline through to the end of the NBA season. So apart from that, 3-4 month period there, this is maybe the first time in a couple of years that Moses has not had to necessarily worry as much about his future with a team, because I think there's been so much trade speculation regarding him over the last couple of years, even as recently as the offseason, where the Warriors appeared to be more than willing to give Moody up in a trade package for Larry Markkinen. That was widely reported, heavily reported. The Warriors are willing to do that, as they should have been. I'm not arguing against that. They should have been willing to give up Moses Moody, and we can argue till the cows come home on what else they should have been willing to give up for Larry Markkinen. It didn't happen. We'll move on. But now with this contract extension, Moses is still trade eligible, but as I said before in regard to Kuminga, he's now got that poison pill contract, which makes it very difficult to match salaries in a trade. The outgoing salary from a Warriors standpoint is still just the yearly salary for this season, which is $5.8 million. But then for another team looking to trade for Moses, the incoming salary is this year's salary plus the 3 years and the average of the total of the 4 years, which is now $11.2 million. Again, with so many teams, around the luxury tax aprons and the whole salary cap squeeze, I just think it's going to be really, really difficult for the Warriors to move Moses, even if they wanted to, which I don't think they do, because they've just given him the 3-year, $39 million extension. So it basically means that Moses is very, very, very unlikely to be traded until at least next offseason at the earliest. It's going to be very difficult for it to happen before February's midseason deadline, which I think is an underrated aspect in this, because it feels like it could be a weight lifted off his shoulders. Like, I know for me now, Moses is a very mature young man. Maybe it doesn't affect him whatsoever, but I know for me, if I was in his situation and the constant speculation about my role in the team, and therefore the constant speculation about my future on the team and stuff, it would weigh on me. And the fact of, when I go out there and play, I've got to try and impress as much as I can to not only try and get a more consistent role, but also just stave off like trade speculation and trade talks that the front office might be having. And so that would be a huge weight and a huge pressure on a young player. That's just how I would see it if I was in Moses' shoes. So the fact that he's now got not only this financial security moving forward, but the team security of understanding, well, the team can't really trade me now until next offseason, that could see him thrive and develop even more than we expect after the preseason he's just had. So I think that is an underrated element to it. The other thing as well, I'll be interested to see how this impacts what the Warriors do next season. Now, it's not a huge jump, but it is, 5.8 million to around 13 million from his salary this season to next season. That's an extra 8 million or so, which the Warriors are going to have to accommodate for, obviously, on their books. So how does that impact, first of all, JK, of course, who we know will now be going into restricted free agency, and then the likes of Kevon Looney, Gary Payton II, who are both on expiring contracts. Those veteran players it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and we've got a whole season to play out, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but based on their form last season, you'd probably struggle to see Loon or GP2 getting more than the minimum. And so maybe the Warriors can bring those guys back on a heavily discounted rate next season as depth pieces, maybe rotation pieces as well. But those guys, the discount they get on those two players may make up for the $8 million rise in salary for Moses. You've also got DeAnthony Melton, who is not only fascinating because he's on an expiring as well, he'll be entering free agency again next offseason, but because he also plays a similar role to Moses. And are the Warriors going to be willing to give Melton, they can do the 20% rise, which is about $15 million for him. Are they going to be willing to give $15 million to him as well as having Moses on about $13 million, or do they just want to have Moses there and he can kind of eat Melton's minutes up that Melton might play this season? I know there's so many different aspects to this and players that could be impacted come free agency next off season, which is really interesting. But we've got, as I said before, we've got so many games, so much time to see and read the situation and see what plays out before we get to free agency next off season. So there'll be discussion about that as the season progresses, but it's not something we need to worry about too much. The other aspect is as well, it's just the role that Moses might have now in the Warrior rotation. Does his contract extension, the front office seeing him as a key part of the present and the future, does Steve feel obligated at all to now play Moses in the rotation on a consistent basis, seeing this guy as, okay, well, now he's going to be on $13 million a year as of next season. The time is now. I'm unleashing him. I'm unlocking him from the chains that I've kind of held him down to over the last couple of seasons in terms of the turbulent and up and down minutes that he's got throughout his career to date. Will we see a difference now based on this extension? I'm not convinced, just because I'm not going to be surprised by anything Steve does when it comes to Moses. So I'm not entirely convinced that this is going to change the outlook and the perspective that Steve has on Moses. I think ultimately that will come down to hopefully what he's shown throughout the preseason and then what he shows once the season starts. If he proves himself to be, above some other guys in the rotation and capable of playing 20, 25 minutes a game, then that's what's going to earn him those minutes, not because he's just got this contract extension. I don't think that should happen anyway. It's guys should be getting minutes purely based on merit. Now, I know that doesn't happen. I know that there's plenty of times where contract situations, money, financial stuff does impact the rotation and guys' minutes and stuff. I understand that. But in Moses' situation, I'm not sure that's necessarily going to be the case. All right, quickly, ahead of Wednesday's game against the Trailblazers, speaking of the rotation, Steve has confirmed a couple of things. A couple of pointless things, unfortunately. Really. He's confirmed that Lindy Waters III and Guy Santos will not be part of the rotation, which is not surprising whatsoever. They were always seen as the 13th and 14th guys on the Golden State roster. So no surprises there, albeit Lindy Waters III was really impressive throughout the preseason, made that incredible buzzer beater to win the game against the Clippers in Hawaii, ended up shooting 44% from three-point range, had a really good plus-minus, couldn't have been more impressive, I don't think, during the preseason games across those 6 outings. But at the same time, I don't think he ever was going to overtake any of the guys above him, because the guys above him were also playing well. And so, therefore, there was just no way, as much as you could point and say, oh, well, the Warriors really need his shooting. And there's probably going to be different times this season where they do need that. But for right now, given the preseason and the way that other guys ahead of him, played well as well, there was not going to be a pathway for him to overtake some guys and be part of a 10-man rotation. Just wasn't going to happen. Now, he's still going to be useful. I think Guy's probably going to be useful at times this season when the Warriors go through some injury concerns and that kind of thing. And, second night of a back-to-back, some guys rest, bring Lindy Waters in is going to be helpful for you. And the Warriors have such a deep roster, which we've spoken about all off-season. But no surprises that Lindy Waters III, Guy Santos, won't be part of the main rotation on Wednesday against the Trailblazers. The only other thing that Steve confirmed in regard to the rotation is that he expects Steph Curry to average about 32 minutes to start the season, which I think is a good number. He averaged 32.7 last season, which was his lowest of the last 4 years. Obviously, 36, turning 37 years old early next year. You want to try and lessen the burden on Steph in terms of minutes-wise as much as you can. I think all of us are still a little bit concerned about the lack of a genuine second star and therefore the amount that Steve will have to lean on Steph, and can he actually keep him to the 32 minutes he's forecast here? We'll wait and see. But I do think that the depth of the Golden State roster will hopefully during the regular season be enough to lessen the burden on Steph and allow him to play the 32 minutes, which I don't think he's done. Well, he averaged less than 32 in that injury-interrupted season where he played 5 games in 2019-20. But other than that, it's been 6 or 7 years, I think, since he's played 32 minutes a game. It's always been a little bit more than that. 32.7 last season, I think around 34 for the few years prior as well. So that was the only other thing that Steve really mentioned today. Other than that, we're still none the wiser on the starting lineup, albeit I'm pretty sure it's going to be Steph, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, Trace. That would be my expectation. And still none the wiser on the rotation. Now, I'm going to predict my minutes here. Just to finish up this episode, did the season opening preview with Reece Coons yesterday. So if you haven't checked that out, please do, where we go through the contrasting team styles, individual matchups, all that stuff in terms of the season opener between the Warriors and Trailblazers. But just in terms of the minutes for this game, this was how I would lay it out, 240 minutes across the course of the game. Steph, 32 minutes. I actually had that penciled down already before Steve even said that. I thought 32 minutes was the right amount for Steph. So I'm glad Steve and I are on the same page when it comes to that. I'm going to be interested to see if Wiggins is on a minute restriction. I've got him at 22 here just because I think he might be. 2 preseason games, played around the 20 to 22 minute mark. Maybe that should remain the case for the first few games. I don't know. We'll wait and see what Steve has to say on that. It'll be interesting. I think that's something he will announce beforehand, so we might hear about it in the next 24 hours or so. I've got Wiggins at 22, Kuminga at 28, Draymond at 30. I don't think Draymond should be playing any more than 30. I think, like Steph, the Warriors should be trying to lessen his burden as much as possible. And then I've got TJD at 28, which is maybe slightly higher, but I'll get back to it in a second. Then off the bench, these are my 5 off the bench. Pods playing 22 minutes, Melton playing 22 minutes, Buddy Hield playing 18 minutes, Moses Moody playing 20 minutes, and Kyle Anderson playing 18 minutes. That would be my 5 off the bench. So what that means is 28 minutes of Trace Jackson-Davis. Now, that means I've got no Kevon Looney. Now, I can see Steve going to 11 and Loon being the 11th, right? And therefore, maybe Trace plays 20 and Loon plays 8 to 10 minutes or something like that, and maybe a couple of minutes less for slow-mo, because in this rotation, I've got 28 minutes of TJD at center, 15 minutes of Draymond at center, and I've just thrown in 5 minutes of Kyle Anderson at center. Now, can you get away with that against the Trailblazers? Spoke about it with Reece on the season, on the preview, about the Trailblazers' size with, of course, DeAndre Ayton, Donovan Clingan, Rob Williams. I think Reece said he's going to be questionable for this matchup. So can you get away with it? Can Kyle Anderson play 5 minutes as a small ball center? We didn't really see it over the preseason. If the Warriors want to play their best players, which I think is somewhat important. Now, yes, it's got to be in the right lineups and combinations. I get that. But if the Warriors want to play their best players, I just think this is the 10 best players. And then Loon's the 11th. GP2 is out of the mix as well, of course, in this rotation that I've spoke about here. So can you get away with Kyle Anderson? If you can't, maybe it's, Kyle Anderson only plays 13 to 15 minutes. Looney plays, an extra 5 minutes at center, and maybe he takes some of TJD's, and, TJD plays 20 and Loon plays 10 to 15. I don't know. There's so many different ways that Steve could go, but this is just what I'm kind of outlining in my head and what I've written down here. Again, Steph 32, Wiggins 22, Kuminga 28, Draymond 30, TJD 28, which is probably, again, I'll reiterate, that's probably a bit of a high point, but if you're not going to play Loon, then TJD probably needs to play a fair bit. And again, trying to get the upside out of the young guy and trying to get the development there, and how that could change the Warriors and influence the Warriors over the course of the season, I think is important. Pods 22, Melton 22, Heald 18, Moody 20, Slow-Mo 18. Let me know what you think of my minutes dispersion there in the Warrior rotation for the season opener against the Trailblazers on Wednesday. Let me know what minutes you'd be given different guys, whether or not you think Loon, GP2 should be in the mix, whether you're disappointed that Lindy Waters III won't be in the mix, as Steve has confirmed, all that. Otherwise, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252, that's POK252 on X/Twitter, and I'll be back for the live stream after the game against the Trailblazers. As I said at the start, probably we'll be starting that at about 10 p.m. Pacific time. So hope you can join me, and otherwise hope you continue to have a good week.